They told me she would never see freedom again. West Texas, September 1944. The sun stretched high above the endless plains, heat waves rippling over dust-baked earth, turning everything to copper and shadow. From the distant horizon, the outline of Camp Hearn emerged like a mirage, wooden barracks and fences stretching across the vast open land. The air carried the faint scent of leather, hay, and the faint smoke from distant chimneys. 8 women stepped off the transport truck, their uniforms muted gray against the vivid brightness of the landscape. Their movements were careful, measured, a kind of discipline ingrained from months of travel and work far from home. Among them, Anna Muller's eyes swept over the camp, taking in every detail. The barracks, the watchtower, the fence posts, the wide open space that both promised freedom and imposed rules. Her hands tightened on the straps of the small bag she carried, the weight of unfamiliarity pressing against her shoulders. She had been told of Americans, of harsh treatment, of strangers who would show no mercy. But what she saw now challenged every warning, every story she had been told. The heat made the uniform cling, sticky against her back, but she did not flinch, her gaze locked ahead, wary yet curious. Sheriff William Carter stood at the edge of the corral, tall and broad-shouldered, eyes narrowing as he watched the new arrivals. His posture was upright, confident, a man used to command but aware of the delicate balance of power and trust that hovered in this camp. He did not speak at first, letting the moment stretch, letting the silence frame the scene like a lens focusing on something fragile and profound. A single wooden gate creaked as a gentle wind stirred the dust along the path. Carter's boots crunched softly on the gravel as he stepped forward, measuring distance, tone, and presence. He stopped several feet away, just enough to be observed, just enough to be seen but not threatening. Anna's eyes flicked toward him, curiosity and caution mingling in the pale blue depths. The other women murmured quietly among themselves, their German voices low and cautious, blending with the soft hum of cicadas. The heat pressed in from all sides, the sun reflecting off the fence rails, the smell of dust and dry grass thick in the air. Carter's gaze never wavered, assessing, reading their posture, noting the tension in shoulders and the way their hands clutched small personal belongings. A moment stretched longer than measured time, heavy with expectation, the air between them charged with the weight of decisions unspoken. He lifted a hand slightly, a simple, nonverbal gesture, and Anna felt the subtle pulse of intent, the quiet signal that not all men here were to be feared. The truck tires left faint tracks in the dry clay, the sound of distant hooves clattering from a corral nearby, blending with the soft calls of birds. Anna adjusted the strap of her bag, shifting her weight, a small act of comfort amid uncertainty. Carter's lips tightened, the corners barely upturned, an almost imperceptible acknowledgment of shared observation, human to human, across languages and fear. The women moved with disciplined steps toward their assigned quarters, and Anna's gaze lingered on Carter, noting the slight nod as he allowed them passage, a silent assurance that this encounter was not an act of hostility. The wind stirred once more, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush, of distant cedar, wrapping around them, the vast Texas sky above stretching into infinity, and in that moment, the camp felt both imposing and strangely open, a space where the first threads of trust might begin to weave themselves quietly in the shadows of discipline and duty. The morning sun had barely crested the wide Texas horizon when Anna Muller and the other prisoners were guided toward the labor assignments that would occupy their day. The air was thick with heat, and the faint scent of dust stirred by the movement of boots and wagons. Anna adjusted the strap of her bag, feeling the weight of unfamiliarity press more firmly against her shoulders as the camp spread before her in long rows of barracks and fenced pens. The other women moved with careful, synchronized steps, a mixture of weariness and rigid discipline, their eyes scanning every detail, noting fences, gates, and the positions of guards with alert precision. William Carter emerged from the shade of the central office, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the red clay path as he approached the group. He carried with him a sense of authority tempered by the awareness that these women were not combatants, but individuals displaced and wary. His eyes traced their posture, their hesitation, their silent communication, and he allowed a subtle shift in his stance that spoke of observation rather than confrontation. The sun warmed the back of his neck, and a dry breeze carried with it the faint scent of livestock from a nearby corral, mingling with the tang of the dry earth. As Anna drew closer, she noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful placement of his hands at his sides, the measured cadence of his steps. It was precise but not aggressive, a rhythm that allowed space for human observation without imposing fear. She lifted her chin slightly, her pale eyes meeting his for a brief moment, scanning, reading, assessing, and in that fleeting exchange, there was the faintest trace of recognition of shared awareness, an understanding that their worlds, though disparate, were intersecting for reasons that neither yet fully understood. A wagon creaked in the distance, wooden wheels pressing into the sun-baked soil, sending small clouds of dust curling up and catching the golden light like tiny specks of amber. The other women whispered in low tones. Their voices carried the musicality of their German language, soft against the ambient hum of the camp. William noted the subtle cues, a hand brushing a stray lock of hair from a sunburned forehead, a slight tightening of the lips, the way shoulders hunched slightly against the heat. These were details, small but meaningful, pieces of human behavior that told him more than any report or directive could. He walked along a measured path parallel to their line, neither too close to startle nor too distant to appear indifferent. Anna adjusted her steps, careful to maintain the pace set by the group, yet her gaze wandered, taking in the corrugated metal roofs of the barracks, the neat rows of fences, the faint smoke curling from chimneys, and the vast openness of the surrounding plains. She noticed the patterns in the shadows cast by wooden posts and the way the sunlight shifted as the morning progressed, her mind cataloging, interpreting, always calculating the unfamiliar. William slowed as he reached the midpoint of the group, letting his eyes rest briefly on each face, catching the tension, the hesitation, the silent questions behind the carefully maintained composure. He offered a small gesture, a slight nod in the direction of the water supply, a signal of guidance without command, and Anna felt the faintest sense of relief ripple through her chest, a subtle recognition that not all gestures here were threats. The wind shifted, carrying the faint metallic tang of early morning dew on wire fences, and she inhaled slowly, noting the way the air moved across the plains, the distance to the nearest horizon stretching endlessly. The other women responded in small ways, mirroring the careful cadence, the unspoken negotiation of trust and authority that William maintained. Anna felt the faint pull of curiosity amidst the apprehension, a cautious attention to detail as she tracked his movements and considered the subtle signals woven into his posture and timing. The heat intensified as the sun climbed higher, glinting off the metal buckles on their uniforms, highlighting strands of hair plastered to the back of their necks with sweat. William observed the way Anna adjusted her stance, how she shifted her weight from foot to foot, how she handled the bag against her body, and he noted that the smallest of actions carried volumes of unspoken communication. He allowed himself a brief, imperceptible exhale, the kind that released tension without signaling relaxation, maintaining equilibrium between authority and empathy. Anna glanced toward the distant corral, the clatter of hooves faint but constant, and registered the rhythm of life within the camp, the repetition of tasks that were at once monotonous and strangely grounding. She felt a flicker of agency in knowing the order of her surroundings, the sequence of labor, the placement of tools and water buckets, the structured cadence of morning work that would occupy her hours. William continued along the line, his eyes tracking each subtle movement, acknowledging the small details, the minor hesitations, the almost imperceptible microgestures that revealed character and disposition. The sun crested fully over the horizon, casting long shadows that crept across the red clay and wooden posts, the brightness tempered by the occasional shade of scattered trees. Anna felt the weight of the morning, both in temperature and expectation, yet there was an undercurrent of potential, a quiet possibility in the measured observation, in the silent acknowledgment that human action, even in the smallest gestures, could shape the perception and experience of the day. As they reached the water supply, William paused, letting the moment extend without verbal instruction, and Anna recognized the subtlety of intent, the way observation without interference could provide guidance, the unspoken permission to proceed within the bounds of discipline and care. The group moved methodically, the sound of footsteps, the shifting of cloth, and the occasional clink of metal from tools forming a pattern, a rhythm that William absorbed and Anna interpreted, each aware of the other's presence without the necessity of words, the language of action and attention bridging the gap between authority and wariness, forming the foundation of understanding that would quietly, invisibly, guide the unfolding day. By late morning, the sun had climbed higher, turning the red clay of the camp into a canvas of heat and shimmering light, the distant hills casting faint, wavering shadows across the flat expanse. Anna Muller moved alongside the other women, carrying a wooden bucket of water toward the small garden plot assigned for their labor, the weight of the vessel pressing into her palms, droplets forming along the sides and glinting in the sun. Her steps were measured, precise, each footfall stirring dust that floated like golden haze in the afternoon light. William Carter watched from the edge of the path, his eyes following her movement, noting the way she adjusted her grip, how her shoulders shifted as she balanced the load. He did not call out instructions, did not make a sound. His presence alone established boundaries, authority tempered with observation, the quiet but unmistakable expectation that the work would be done well and safely. The other women followed in line, their movements a choreography of resilience, each gesture deliberate and controlled, the faint creak of shoes on clay punctuating the stillness around them. Anna glanced up toward the sheriff as she paused to set the bucket down on a raised wooden stand, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. William nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgment that the task had been completed properly, no words needed, the recognition conveyed entirely through posture and gaze. Around them, the camp hummed with quiet activity, the occasional clatter of tools, the rustle of skirts, the soft murmur of German words exchanged in hushed tones, punctuated by the distant crow of a rooster from the far side of the compound. The heat radiated from the ground in waves, the air thick and slightly sweet with the scent of dust and sun-warmed earth. Anna moved back to the water trough, her steps slow yet purposeful, calculating each motion against the uneven terrain, feeling the strain in her arms, the pressure on her shoulders. Yet there was a rhythm in the work, a meditative cadence that allowed the mind to settle even as the body labored. William walked a short distance beside the path, careful to maintain a presence that was observed but not intrusive, allowing space for observation without interference, a silent communication of trust and vigilance. He noticed the subtle gestures of Anna as she paused to adjust a loose strap on her uniform, the way she tilted her head slightly in consideration of the sun's glare, the flicker of concentration across her features as she calculated the next step. The other women responded to their own tasks with similar diligence, the group forming a quiet harmony of labor, each aware of the others, moving in a rhythm dictated by necessity and the unspoken rules of the camp. A breeze moved across the plains, carrying with it the scent of cedar and distant wildflowers, rustling the thin fabric of their uniforms and stirring loose strands of hair that clung to the nape of Anna's neck. She breathed deeply, the dry air filling her lungs with each measured inhale, noting the subtle temperature shifts as clouds briefly passed in front of the sun, casting moving shadows over the clay and the sparse greenery of the garden plots. William paused again, letting his gaze sweep across the line, catching the small details, the tilt of a head, the adjustment of a hand, the way sunlight reflected off water droplets on leaves, a quiet choreography that revealed attention to detail, care, and adaptability. Anna's thoughts drifted briefly to her family, to distant memories of home, the smells of baked bread, the sound of children laughing in the streets. Yet she returned her focus immediately to the task at hand, grounding herself in the physical labor, in the pattern of steps and placements, the gentle coordination of hands and tools, the quiet reassurance that each measured action contributed to the rhythm of the morning. William moved closer to the garden, observing without intruding, offering no corrections, but noting the precision and care with which Anna and the others handled the plants and the soil. The sun rose higher, the heat pressing in on the shoulders and necks of all who worked in its glare, yet there was a subtle comfort in the familiarity of routine, in the silent acknowledgment that the labor, though arduous, was safe and structured. Anna adjusted her stance, feeling the pull in her arms and back, yet noticing the steady gaze of William, a silent support that allowed her to continue with confidence, a reassurance carried entirely through presence and attention rather than speech. The afternoon stretched onward, the rhythms of movement, the sounds of steps on clay, the clinking of tools and buckets, the shifting light and shadow across the camp, all forming an intricate pattern of observation, trust, and careful collaboration. Each action, small yet deliberate, carried with it the weight of understanding and adaptation, forming a bridge between authority and compliance, between suspicion and the first glimmers of trust. Anna moved among the plants, adjusting each one with care, her hands brushing against leaves and soil, noting the texture, the weight, the subtle differences, while William continued to observe, recording each detail, not in writing but in attentive perception, the silent calibration of human behavior, creating a foundation for understanding, for recognition, for the unspoken connection that was slowly, quietly forming beneath the wide Texas sky. The afternoon sun hung high, the heat stretching across the red clay and wooden posts, shimmering in waves that distorted the edges of the barracks and the scattered trees around the camp. Anna Muller carried a basket of harvested vegetables, the weight pressing against her forearms, sweat glistening along the strands of hair at her temples. Each step was deliberate, measured against the uneven ground, mindful of the slight inclines and the loose stones that could shift underfoot. William Carter stood nearby, leaning lightly against the corner of the central office, his eyes tracing the arc of her movements, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands flexed around the basket handles, the subtle adjustment of her posture with each careful turn. The camp hummed with quiet activity, the shuffle of feet on packed clay, the faint rattle of tools, the soft murmur of German voices exchanging brief observations and small encouragements. Anna paused momentarily, lifting the basket to adjust her grip, and caught a glimpse of William observing her. His eyes, steady and attentive, held a kind of measured approval, unspoken, as if acknowledging the precision and care of her work without the need for words. The sun reflected off metal water cans resting near the garden, casting shifting patterns across the dusty ground. A gentle breeze stirred the loose hair along Anna's neck, and she inhaled slowly, drawing in the warm air carrying the scent of sun-baked earth, dry grass, and faint cedar from the distant trees. She let herself notice these details, small and grounding, while maintaining the rhythm of her task, placing each vegetable carefully into the basket, the sound of soft thuds against the wood creating a subtle percussion. William stepped forward, keeping pace at a respectful distance, his shadow stretching long across the sun-warmed clay, offering guidance through presence rather than instruction. The other women moved in tandem, their motions synchronized by habit and training, the quiet harmony of coordinated effort forming a rhythm that filled the space between barracks and garden plots. Anna felt a flicker of confidence, a small ease in knowing that her careful attention and steady hands were noticed, her focus sharpened not by fear, but by the tacit recognition that diligence was valued. She glanced toward the distant corral, the soft clatter of hooves blending with the whisper of wind through sparse foliage, and considered the expanse of the plains beyond, the horizon stretching wide, a silent testament to both the vastness and isolation of the camp. William adjusted his stance slightly, the subtle movement conveying alertness without intrusion, awareness without interference, a balance that allowed Anna and the others to navigate their tasks with autonomy and measured assurance. Anna shifted her weight, the basket steady against her forearms, her eyes tracing the rows of plants she had tended, noting the small differences in soil, leaf texture, and the faint hint of color that indicated readiness for harvest. She worked with care, deliberate and exacting, each movement deliberate, attuned to detail, while William observed, allowing the scene to unfold naturally, recording not in paper but in perception, the slow accumulation of understanding between them. The sunlight moved across the camp, changing angles and casting long, sharp shadows that marked the passage of time, highlighting the red dust along pathways, the texture of worn wood, the glint of metal tools resting in the sun. Anna paused again, taking a brief moment to wipe her brow. The heat pressing upon her, but her steps unbroken, her focus unwavering, her awareness of William's presence quiet but constant, a subtle reassurance threading through the labor. Around them, the ambient sounds of work continued. The faint scrape of shovels, the soft thump of baskets on wooden stands, the low hum of conversation, the distant bark of a dog or call of a bird, all blending into a layered rhythm of camp life. She moved with precision, careful not to jostle the contents of the basket, adjusting her stride to maintain balance, her hands flexing, wrists steady, muscles engaging in repeated, controlled movements. William's gaze followed every motion, noting how she adapted to the terrain, how she maintained rhythm and focus despite the heat and exertion, recognizing the quiet competence in her labor. The light shifted subtly, casting elongated shadows and warming the air with the low hum of late afternoon, painting the camp in golden tones, highlighting the simple geometry of fence posts, the linear patterns of raised garden beds, and the subtle curvature of distant hills. Anna breathed evenly, in rhythm with the cadence of her movements, each inhale and exhale a measured counterpoint to the steady progression of work, while William's presence offered a quiet, stabilizing force, the unspoken support and observation reinforcing a tentative trust that had begun to form over the morning. She placed the last vegetable in the basket, noting the arrangement and weight, and held it for a moment, feeling the subtle pulse of accomplishment, the faint sense of shared understanding, unspoken and quiet, between observer and laborer, as the vast Texas sky above stretched endlessly, holding the heat, the dust, and the promise of continued work in careful, deliberate motion. As the afternoon stretched onward, the sun climbed higher and the heat thickened the air over the red clay of Camp Hearn, casting long, wavering shadows that stretched across the fenced grounds. Anna Mahler carried a small bundle of harvested vegetables, her fingers gripping the woven handles with careful precision, her movements deliberate and rhythmic, the sound of her steps mingling with the faint rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the other women nearby. The distant corral echoed with the soft clatter of hooves as the cattle shifted beneath the wide Texas sky, a subtle reminder of the vastness of the land and the endless horizon beyond. William Carter moved along the edge of the garden plot, observing without interruption, his posture relaxed yet alert, eyes attentive to every motion, every adjustment, every subtle shift in weight or balance. The women worked in quiet synchronization, each movement precise, a choreography of labor honed by routine and necessity. Anna paused to adjust the bundle in her arms, sweat glistening along her temples, the warmth of the sun pressing against her back, the faint scent of dry earth and sun-baked grass clinging to the air. She glanced toward William, noting the slight nod of acknowledgment, a gesture that carried reassurance without words, the recognition of effort and attention to detail bridging the quiet space between them. The breeze stirred faintly, lifting stray strands of hair from her neck and carrying the delicate scent of wild sage across the open expanse. Anna focused on the next row of plants, bending with care, her hands brushing against the soil, adjusting leaves, checking stems for readiness, her attention meticulous and unhurried. William's gaze traced each movement, noting the subtle interplay of balance and effort, the way she distributed weight evenly, the methodical cadence that ensured stability and efficiency. Around them, the camp's ambient sounds formed a layered rhythm. The scrape of shoes against clay, the soft thud of baskets settling onto wooden platforms, the distant call of birds, and the faint murmur of conversation in German among the other women. Anna lifted a handful of soil, letting it sift slowly through her fingers, feeling the texture, the warmth, the dry granules slipping between her digits, a sensory anchor amid the repetitive labor. William stepped slightly closer, still maintaining measured distance, the shadow of his form elongating across the ground, a quiet presence that neither intruded nor demanded, yet provided a subtle sense of security. Anna adjusted her stance to accommodate the weight of the basket and the uneven terrain, her muscles flexing with deliberate control, her breathing steady, the sweat glistening on her skin reflecting the high sun. She felt a flicker of agency, the reassurance of competence in her movements, a quiet confidence nurtured by precision and attention. William observed the interactions between the women, the brief nods, the subtle communication of shared tasks, the small signs of mutual understanding and unspoken collaboration. The sun continued its arc, light shifting angles and highlighting details in the red clay, the wooden fence posts, the raised garden beds, and the distant hills, the brightness accentuating textures and shadows alike. Anna paused briefly, inhaling the dry, warm air, feeling the subtle pull of fatigue in her limbs, yet buoyed by the steady rhythm of her labor and the silent acknowledgment of her efforts from William. She placed the final vegetables in the basket, aligning them carefully, noting the weight distribution, and lifted it with practiced care, the small motion conveying competence and deliberation. William's eyes followed her every adjustment, the smallest gestures informing his understanding, the rhythm of movement between observer and laborer forming an unspoken dialogue of trust, attention, and cautious familiarity. The afternoon light softened slightly as clouds drifted across the sky, casting moving shadows across the clay and the garden, the temperature dipping marginally, yet the heat remained palpable, the sun glinting off metal tools resting nearby, and reflecting off leaves glistening with the morning's efforts. Anna walked toward the central stand to place the basket, her steps deliberate, each footfall measured, balancing effort with poise, the quiet precision of her actions harmonizing with the ambient rhythm of the camp. William followed at a respectful distance, shadowing her movement, his attention constant, allowing her autonomy while maintaining the steady awareness of responsibility and oversight. The air carried the faint mixture of dust, earth, and the subtle scent of nearby livestock, blending with the warmth of sun-warmed wooden structures, the distant stretch of plains framing a backdrop of expansive, open sky. Anna paused, looking toward William, reading the unspoken acknowledgment in his eyes, feeling a subtle pulse of connection and trust threading through the careful cadence of work and observation. The other women adjusted their positions, moving in silent accord, their actions forming a quiet harmony of labor, each aware of the others, their focus intense, deliberate, yet tempered with a shared understanding of order and expectation. William stepped back slightly, letting the movements continue naturally, absorbing the rhythm, the sound, the heat, the subtle interactions, the quiet diligence of the women, the measured attention that carried a sense of discipline, competence, and the initial threads of cautious trust and understanding under the wide Texas sky. The late afternoon sun tilted low, casting long, warm shadows across the red clay paths and wooden fences of Camp Hearn, the heat lingering in the air like a tangible weight that pressed gently against the skin. Anna Muller moved steadily among the garden rows, her hands carefully arranging harvested vegetables in the woven basket, noting the small details in each leaf, each stem, the subtle variations that marked readiness. The breeze lifted the soft fragrance of sun-baked earth and faint traces of cedar from the distant trees, mingling with the warmth of the day. William Carter walked along the perimeter of the plot, shadowing her movements with measured steps, his eyes attentive to posture, rhythm, and the delicate balance of effort and precision in her work. The other women shifted quietly around them, their motions synchronized and deliberate, each aware of the others, a silent orchestra of diligence and coordination. Anna paused, adjusting the basket on her forearm, glancing toward William, noting the steady yet unobtrusive way he observed, a presence that offered reassurance without command, a silent affirmation that her actions were seen and recognized. The sunlight glinted off metal water cans resting nearby, highlighting the texture of dust on clay and the subtle undulations of the terrain. She inhaled slowly, savoring the warmth in the air, the faint smell of dry grass, the distant hum of cicadas, grounding herself in the sensory details that surrounded her. William stepped slightly closer, maintaining a distance that allowed freedom yet offered subtle guidance, his shadow stretching alongside her, a quiet accompaniment to her measured movements. The rhythmic sounds of labor filled the space, the soft thud of baskets settling on wooden stands, the scrape of shoes against packed earth, the gentle murmur of German voices exchanging brief instructions or observations, punctuated by the faint clatter of hooves in the distant corral. Anna adjusted her grip on the basket, flexing her fingers, balancing weight and motion, the sun glinting across her pale hair and sweat-darkened uniform, the heat pressing insistently, yet manageable against her skin. William's eyes followed every microgesture, noting the subtle shifts in stance, the tilt of her head, the deliberate coordination of limbs and hands, a pattern of careful, conscious motion that spoke of attention and adaptability. The other women worked alongside her, each movement precise, deliberate, forming a quiet harmony that extended across the rows of the garden, their combined effort creating a rhythm that defined the afternoon. Anna bent to adjust a plant, feeling the dry soil slip through her fingers, noting the warmth, the texture, the slight stickiness of sun-warmed earth, the way leaves responded to her touch. William observed, letting the silence stretch, appreciating the interplay between diligence, concentration, and the unspoken trust that had begun to develop, small gestures and attentiveness building a subtle understanding without words. The sunlight shifted, casting new shadows and glinting on leaves and metal, the warmth enveloping the camp in a rich, golden light that softened the edges of the barracks and highlighted the distant horizon. Anna straightened, lifting the basket with careful precision, muscles flexing with controlled effort, noting the weight distribution, the alignment, the balance required to move without spilling the contents. William stepped back slightly, allowing the motion to proceed uninterrupted, his attention constant but unobtrusive, observing the pattern of movement, the interaction of light and shadow, the silent rhythm of work and focus. The wind lifted again, carrying the scent of dry soil, sage, and distant cedar, rustling loose strands of hair against the nape of her neck, mingling with the warmth of late afternoon, a subtle reminder of the open sky and vast landscape surrounding the camp. Anna inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the rhythm of labor, the measured cadence of steps, the tactile feedback of basket and soil, while William continued his quiet survey, the shared attention forming an unspoken dialogue of diligence, trust, and mutual awareness beneath the expansive Texas sky. Each movement, small and deliberate, carried meaning. Each pause a subtle note of reflection, each glance a silent acknowledgment of effort and observation, building the quiet foundation of understanding and cautious familiarity as the day edged toward evening, the sun lowering further, painting the camp in shifting tones of gold and amber, the warm light stretching across red clay and wooden structures, highlighting the interplay of labor, observation, and emerging trust. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, the red clay of Camp Hearn glowed with a warm, amber hue, stretching shadows across the neat rows of wooden barracks and the long, winding paths that marked the daily route of labor and supervision. Anna Mahler carried a freshly filled basket of vegetables toward the central stand, her hands steady despite the weight, her posture upright yet relaxed from hours of careful work. Each step pressed into the packed earth with quiet purpose, the slight creak of her shoes mingling with the distant clatter of hooves and the soft murmur of her fellow women as they completed their assigned tasks. William Carter followed at a measured distance, his tall figure casting a long, deliberate shadow across the sun-warmed ground, eyes scanning her movements with focused attention, noting each subtle shift in balance, each careful adjustment of weight, and the way she anticipated minor irregularities. In the terrain, the breeze carried the earthy scent of sun-baked soil, faint cedar from the distant trees, and the subtle aroma of dry grass, mingling with the warmth of late afternoon. Anna paused at the stand, setting the basket down carefully, fingers brushing against the smooth wood, noting the slight wobble of the surface and adjusting the placement to prevent tipping. She glanced toward William, catching the faint acknowledgment in his eyes, a silent recognition that spoke volumes more than any words could. The other women moved in quiet, synchronized motion, their footsteps and tool sounds creating a low rhythm that filled the air, punctuated occasionally by muted German voices communicating in brief, precise exchanges. Anna bent slightly, adjusting the alignment of the vegetables in the basket, the sweat along her temples glinting in the sunlight, her brow dampened from the heat and effort, yet her movements remained controlled, meticulous, and deliberate. William took a step closer, careful to maintain the space that allowed autonomy, while offering subtle guidance, his shadow merging briefly with hers on the clay before separating again. The visual connection unnoticed by others, but tangible in the rhythm of their movement. Around them, the camp was alive with quiet activity. The scrape of wooden tools against raised beds, the soft thud of baskets being set down, the distant lowing of cattle, and occasional chirp of birds punctuating the otherwise steady cadence of work. Anna inhaled slowly, drawing in the warm, dry air, the subtle fragrance of dust, plants, and the far-off scent of livestock mingling in a sensory tapestry that grounded her even as she maintained full attention to her task. She shifted her weight to carry the basket back toward the center, flexing her fingers and adjusting her stance to maintain balance and rhythm, noting the subtle imperfections in the clay beneath her feet and compensating without breaking pace. William's gaze followed every deliberate movement, the slight furrow of her brow, the shift of her shoulders, the microgestures that conveyed both effort and concentration, registering the careful calibration of human action in real time. The sunlight angled lower, golden tones spreading across the camp, highlighting textures in wood, soil, and leaves, casting long, subtle shadows that elongated the figures of women bending, lifting, and moving with precision. Anna paused briefly to rest, setting the basket down and wiping her brow with the back of her hand, glancing toward William with the faintest of nods, a silent acknowledgment of the shared awareness between them, the unspoken dialogue carried entirely through observation and presence. He returned the nod, lips pressed together, eyes steady, maintaining the subtle balance between authority and unobtrusive presence, the quiet support reinforcing her confidence and measured attention. The breeze shifted slightly, lifting loose strands of hair from Anna's neck and carrying with it the scent of dry earth and distant cedar, blending with the residual warmth of the day. She bent once more to adjust a small cluster of plants, noting the soil texture, the placement of leaves, and the gentle sway of stems in the wind, each movement deliberate, controlled, and precise, harmonizing with the rhythm established by the morning and early afternoon. William moved along the perimeter, shadowing without interference, observing the interplay of focus, diligence, and cautious trust that had quietly formed over hours of labor, a rhythm of silent acknowledgment and measured presence. The sun continued its descent, softening the light, deepening the warmth, and casting a rich glow across red clay, wooden structures, and green foliage. Anna inhaled again, steadying herself, sensing the unspoken connection, the shared attention, and the quiet understanding that had taken root, a foundation of mutual respect and careful observation beneath the vast, endless Texas sky. The sun dipped lower toward the horizon, bathing the camp in a golden glow that softened the edges of the red clay paths and the wooden barracks, casting long, gentle shadows that stretched across the expanse. Anna Muller carried a small tray of freshly picked vegetables and herbs toward the central processing stand, her movements deliberate, careful, the faint clink of baskets and tools punctuating the quiet rhythm of the late afternoon. Sweat dampened the back of her uniform, the heat pressing softly yet insistently against her, but her posture remained upright, hands steady, attention fully engaged with the task. William Carter moved alongside the edge of the garden plot, his presence calm and steady, maintaining a measured distance that allowed autonomy while providing a subtle, silent guidance. The other women moved methodically around the grounds, their actions precise, synchronized by habit and careful observation, creating a quiet, almost invisible harmony of labor. Anna paused for a brief moment to adjust the arrangement of the vegetables, noticing the slight tilt of a basket handle, the uneven weight of the contents, and she shifted it carefully, the adjustment precise and controlled, a small demonstration of attentiveness that had become a part of the rhythm of the day. William observed her movements closely, noting the minute adjustments, the subtle calibration of balance and weight, the way she anticipated minor irregularities in the terrain, all while maintaining composure under the warmth of the descending sun. The air carried the scent of sun-baked clay, faint cedar from distant trees, and the dry aroma of grasses warmed by the long day, mingling with the gentle hum of activity, soft German voices exchanging brief comments, and the distant rustle of animals in the corral. Anna inhaled slowly, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on her arms and the rhythmic tension in her muscles, grounding herself in the sensory details of the camp, the heat, the soil, and the subtle patterns of shadow and light across the space around her. William stepped slightly closer, careful not to intrude, his shadow stretching alongside hers, a quiet presence that offered reassurance through observation rather than command. The other women continued their tasks, bending, lifting, and moving with a practiced precision, their synchronized efforts forming a subtle, continuous rhythm that structured the space of the late afternoon. Anna moved to place the tray on the stand, fingers brushing lightly against the wood, noting its stability and making slight adjustments to ensure balance, the small action executed with deliberate care, a reflection of her growing confidence and attention to detail. William's gaze followed every movement, registering each subtle shift, tilt, and micro-gesture, forming an unspoken dialogue of awareness, attentiveness, and developing trust. The sunlight angled lower, creating elongated shadows, illuminating textures of clay, wood, and foliage, highlighting the interplay of labor, observation, and subtle human connection unfolding quietly across the camp. Anna straightened, brushing her palms lightly against her uniform to remove dust, glancing toward William, her eyes catching his steady, approving gaze, a silent acknowledgment of diligence, competence, and attention. A faint breeze stirred, lifting loose strands of hair and carrying the mixed scent of dry earth and cedar, mingling with the warmth of the descending sun and creating a sensory rhythm that matched the measured cadence of their movements. The distant sound of hooves shifted with the light, soft and steady, providing a quiet counterpoint to the ongoing labor. Anna adjusted her stance and grip on the tray, flexing her fingers and balancing the weight, each movement deliberate, careful, and precise, harmonizing with the observed rhythm of the camp and the silent, watchful presence of William. The long shadows stretched further, blending with the warm tones of late afternoon, as each microgesture and careful adjustment formed a subtle language of understanding, observation, and cautious trust between laborer and observer. Anna inhaled again, aligning her breathing with the cadence of motion and the sensory details of the environment, absorbing the warmth, the sounds, the textures, and the subtle human connection that had quietly developed over the course of the day. Each step and motion a reinforcement of diligence, attentiveness, and mutual awareness beneath the expansive, golden Texas sky. The late afternoon sun lowered further, painting the camp with long, golden streaks that slanted across the red clay and wooden barracks, softening the edges of fences and casting deep, warm shadows that stretched toward the distant plains. Anna Muller moved with quiet purpose, carrying the last of the day's harvest in a woven basket, her hands gripping the handles firmly but with careful precision, each step measured against the uneven ground beneath her shoes. The other women moved around her, their gestures deliberate, each action part of a synchronized rhythm of labor, the low hum of conversation in German punctuated by the soft scrape of shoes against clay and the gentle clinking of tools and baskets. William Carter walked along the perimeter of the plot, shadowing her movements with attentive observation, maintaining distance enough to respect autonomy while allowing his presence to convey reassurance and subtle guidance. The warm breeze lifted strands of hair along the nape of Anna's neck, carrying the scent of dry grass, sun-baked soil, and the faint cedar from distant trees. She inhaled slowly, letting the familiar mixture ground her, steadying her thoughts while her hands moved with practiced care, arranging vegetables with meticulous attention to detail, noting weight, balance, and placement, the small movements precise and deliberate. William observed the subtle interplay of posture, breath, and microgestures, the way her shoulders shifted with each step, the careful adjustment of her grip, the calculated motions that revealed both concentration and resilience. The other women followed their own rhythm, bending, lifting, and shifting with quiet attentiveness, the repetition forming a cohesive pattern of activity that structured the space of the late afternoon. Anna paused briefly, at the central stand, setting the basket down, fingers brushing against the smooth wood, adjusting the contents to ensure stability, glancing toward William for a fraction of a moment. His eyes met hers, steady, calm, the faintest nod acknowledging her care, a silent exchange that carried reassurance and quiet approval, building an invisible thread of understanding. The sunlight glinted on the raised beds, highlighting textures of leaves, soil, and the gentle curve of stems, casting dancing shadows across the clay. Anna's breathing remained measured, each inhale and exhale synchronized with the rhythm of motion, her awareness sharpened to the subtle details around her, the shifting light, the faint breeze, the distant calls of birds, and the far-off movement of cattle across the plains. William's presence, quiet and steady, added a layer of certainty to her attention, a watchful steadiness that allowed her confidence to grow in the measured execution of her task. The women moved through the garden plots, each action deliberate, attuned to the environment, to the placement of tools, the weight of baskets, the alignment of plants, the tactile feedback of soil through their fingers. Anna adjusted her grip on the tray, flexing her wrists slightly to compensate for uneven ground, maintaining careful control over each motion, balancing the physical demands of the work with the attentiveness required to complete each task accurately. William shifted his weight subtly, observing, noting, absorbing the delicate interplay between effort, precision, and care, the unspoken communication conveyed through small gestures, glances, and posture. The air carried the faint warmth of sun-warmed clay, dry grasses, and the lingering scent of early afternoon heat, the subtle mixture forming a sensory backdrop that underscored every measured step, every careful adjustment, every conscious motion. Anna placed the last vegetables on the central stand, aligning them carefully, noting the distribution and balance, then stepped back, shoulders easing slightly, eyes lifting to the horizon where the sky met the plains, the golden light casting long shadows and highlighting the textures of the camp in rich, warm tones. William allowed a small, approving shift of stance, acknowledging her diligence without intrusion, maintaining the steady equilibrium between observation and unobtrusive presence. The breeze stirred gently, rustling the leaves, lifting hair from her neck, brushing against arms, carrying the subtle sense of earth and vegetation across the space between laborer and observer. Anna inhaled once more, steadying herself, feeling the quiet connection, the shared attention that had gradually formed, a rhythm of trust, observation, and silent acknowledgment beneath the vast, golden expanse of Texas sky, each gesture and micro-movement reinforcing a careful understanding that had taken root over the course of the long afternoon. The sun had begun its slow descent, the sky painted in hues of amber and soft rose, stretching shadows across the red clay paths and wooden structures of Camp Hearn. Anna Muller carried a small watering can along the rows of garden plots, each step careful and measured, the weight balanced delicately in her hands, the gentle clink of metal against wood punctuating the quiet rhythm of the late afternoon. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of sun-baked earth and dry grasses, mingling faintly with cedar from distant trees, a subtle reminder of the expanse beyond the camp boundaries. William Carter walked parallel to the rows, shadowing her movements with calm attentiveness, maintaining just enough distance to allow autonomy, while his presence offered a quiet sense of reassurance and unspoken guidance. The other women moved methodically through their own tasks, bending and lifting with precision, each movement synchronized in a pattern that spoke of diligence and shared understanding without a word. Anna paused to adjust the angle of the watering can, the sunlight glinting off the metal spout, and she inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the sensation of the warm air, the faint breeze lifting loose strands of hair and carrying with it the subtle scent of soil and vegetation. William observed, noting the careful coordination of her body, the micro-adjustments of balance and grip, the subtle, deliberate rhythm that had become a part of the day's pattern, each movement reflecting attention, discipline, and resilience. Around them, the camp was alive with quiet sounds, the gentle scrape of tools on raised beds, the soft thud of baskets being set down, the low murmur of voices in German exchanging observations, and the distant clatter of hooves moving across the plains. Anna bent slightly, letting water trickle along the soil, noticing the texture, the slight unevenness of the ground, the way light played across leaves and stems, and she adjusted each motion to maintain even distribution, steady pressure, and balance. William stepped slightly closer, shadowing her movement, careful not to intrude, his eyes following each gesture, each subtle shift in weight, acknowledging without words the precision and attentiveness in her labor. The sunlight shifted with the angle of the late afternoon, casting long, soft shadows across the garden beds, highlighting textures of wood, soil, and foliage, the warm light accentuating the patterns of movement and care. Anna straightened, her hands gripping the handle of the watering can as she moved to the next row, muscles flexing with controlled effort, posture upright, and movements deliberate, aligning with the rhythm established through hours of coordinated work. William's shadow followed her across the red clay, a silent accompaniment to the careful cadence of her steps, his eyes registering the microgestures, the subtle expressions of concentration, the calm determination in her posture. The other women continued their tasks with quiet efficiency, each step, bend, and lift forming a measured harmony, the repetition creating a cohesive rhythm that defined the space and time of the late afternoon. Anna adjusted her grip and stance to compensate for the uneven ground, flexing wrists and shoulders to maintain balance, while continuing to pour water steadily across the soil, the rhythmic motion of liquid trickling over the roots forming a subtle, soothing sound. William's gaze followed with unwavering attention, noting how she managed the weight, maintained posture, and adapted to the small irregularities in the terrain, recognizing the diligence and competence that each measured motion conveyed. The breeze shifted, carrying the warm, earthy scent of sun-warmed soil and vegetation, rustling the edges of her uniform, lifting strands of hair at the nape of her neck, a sensory backdrop to the careful rhythm of action and observation. Anna paused briefly, inhaling and letting herself feel the warmth, the smell of earth, the distant sounds of activity, grounding her focus in the small, deliberate actions that structured her afternoon. William stepped back slightly, allowing the natural flow of work to continue, his observation steady, constant, yet unobtrusive, a quiet presence reinforcing the careful attention, rhythm, and emerging trust that had formed over hours under the vast, golden Texas sky. Each microgesture, each small adjustment, each deliberate step carried subtle meaning, an unspoken dialogue of diligence, awareness, and growing understanding between laborer and observer. As the sun continued to lower, painting the camp in rich, warm tones that stretched across the red clay, wooden structures, and expansive plains beyond. The sun was a low, molten disk, casting elongated shadows across the red clay and wooden structures of Camp Hearn, painting the landscape in deep amber and soft gold. Anna Muller carried the last few bundles of harvested vegetables toward the central stand, her hands steady despite the lingering heat, her movements deliberate, precise, each step measured against the uneven terrain. The other women moved alongside her, their motions synchronized, creating a quiet rhythm that echoed softly across the open space, punctuated by the faint murmur of German voices and the subtle clatter of tools and baskets. William Carter walked a few steps behind, shadowing her with careful attentiveness, his presence unobtrusive yet steady, a silent anchor in the rhythm of labor. Anna paused briefly, setting down a basket with careful precision, adjusting the arrangement of its contents, the soft clink of vegetables against the wood marking the quiet passage of time. She looked toward William, catching the faintest of nods, a silent acknowledgment that her attention and care had been observed, a subtle bond forming through these measured gestures. The breeze carried the scent of dry soil, sun-warmed earth, and faint cedar from the distant trees, stirring the edges of her uniform and lifting loose strands of hair along the nape of her neck. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the rhythm of the afternoon, the warmth of the sun, the tactile feedback of the soil, and the careful pattern of her movements. William's gaze followed each microgesture, noting the subtle shifts in balance, posture, and grip, the small adjustments she made to maintain precision and control, building a silent dialogue of trust and attentiveness. Around them, the camp was alive with quiet activity. The scrape of wooden tools, the soft thud of baskets being set down, the distant clatter of hooves, and occasional bird calls blending into a layered rhythm that underscored the labor and observation. Anna adjusted her stance, flexing her wrists and shoulders to maintain balance as she lifted another small basket, her movements controlled and deliberate, a reflection of concentration and careful attention. William stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance, observing the flow of work and the subtle interplay of microgestures, allowing the silent rhythm of diligence and coordination to continue uninterrupted. The sunlight shifted with the angle of late afternoon, highlighting textures of clay, wood, and foliage, casting long, soft shadows that moved with the descending sun, accentuating the depth and dimension of the camp. Anna moved toward the central processing area, her steps deliberate, the small weight of the basket balanced expertly, her breathing even and measured, synchronized with the cadence of her movements and the ambient rhythm of the camp. William followed, shadowing her with steady, careful attention, his eyes noting each motion, the subtle flex of muscles, the tilt of her head, the deliberate calibration of motion against uneven terrain. The other women continued their synchronized labor, bending, lifting, and adjusting with quiet efficiency, forming a cohesive, silent pattern that structured the afternoon and the space of the camp. Anna paused to set the basket down, inhaling deeply, absorbing the warmth, the faint breeze, the sounds of distant animals, and the quiet hum of conversation, grounding herself in the sensory details that framed her afternoon. William allowed a slight shift of stance, a silent acknowledgment of her diligence, maintaining the balance between unobtrusive presence and attentive observation, reinforcing the subtle trust and understanding that had developed throughout the day. The sunlight deepened, casting golden tones across the camp, highlighting the textures of the raised beds, the wooden fences, and the sweeping red clay. While Anna continued her careful, deliberate work, each micro-gesture and measured step contributing to a quiet dialogue of attention, respect, and emerging familiarity between laborer and observer beneath the vast, fading Texas sky. Every movement, every pause, every breath aligned with the rhythm of the camp, the steady interplay of focus, observation, and silent communication forming an invisible thread that bound the afternoon together in careful, deliberate harmony, the golden light softening and enriching the textures of earth, wood, and plant life, carrying the shared, unspoken understanding of the day toward evening's close. The evening sun had dipped lower, casting long, soft shadows across the red clay and wooden barracks, bathing Camp Hearn in a warm, golden light that softened the edges of the fences and garden plots. Anna Mahler carried a small basket toward the central stand, her steps deliberate and careful, each footfall pressing softly into the packed earth, her movements synchronized with the quiet rhythm of labor that had carried through the day. The other women moved methodically nearby, bending, lifting, adjusting with precise attention, forming a silent, cohesive pattern that filled the space with a subtle harmony. William Carter walked a measured distance behind her, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the clay, eyes attentive to each micro-gesture, noting the careful alignment of her body, the flex of her fingers as she balanced the weight of the basket, the subtle shifts in posture that spoke of concentration and measured effort. The air was warm, carrying the scent of dry earth, sun-baked soil, faint cedar from distant trees, and the gentle hint of vegetables and plants, a sensory landscape that grounded the mind even as the body moved through repeated, deliberate motions. Anna paused to adjust the contents of the basket, tilting it slightly to balance the weight, her fingers brushing against the woven handles, the subtle motion precise and controlled, a reflection of her attentiveness and growing confidence. William's eyes followed every gesture, noting the careful coordination of muscles, the controlled flex of her wrists, the small adjustments she made to maintain balance on uneven ground, each action reinforcing her competence and awareness. Around them, the camp carried a quiet rhythm. The scrape of shoes against clay, the gentle clink of baskets settling on wooden stands, the soft hum of German voices exchanging brief comments or guidance, the distant movement of cattle in the corrals beyond the fences. Anna inhaled deeply, letting the warmth of the sun, the faint breeze stirring hair along the nape of her neck, and the earthy scents of the late afternoon ground her focus and steady her breathing. She bent slightly to place the basket carefully on the stand, noting the texture of the wood, the slight irregularities in the surface, adjusting for balance, each motion executed with deliberate care. William remained at a measured distance, allowing the natural rhythm of work to proceed uninterrupted, his presence steady, attentive, and quietly reassuring, reinforcing the subtle trust and understanding that had formed through the day. The sunlight shifted, softening as the sun lowered further, painting the garden plots, fences, and barracks in warm tones of amber and gold, the long shadows accentuating the depth and texture of the camp. Anna straightened, brushing her palms lightly against her uniform, adjusting the basket handles, and aligning her posture with careful precision, muscles flexing with controlled effort, movements measured and deliberate, harmonizing with the established rhythm of the afternoon. William observed the flow of her actions, noting every subtle microgesture, the gentle adjustments of balance, the attentive care in her motions, recognizing the disciplined, thoughtful approach that underscored her labor. The other women continued their synchronized work, bending and moving with quiet precision, forming a rhythm that structured the space and time of the late afternoon, a pattern of attention, diligence, and shared focus. Anna inhaled slowly, grounding herself in the sensory details of the moment. The warmth of the air on her arms, the scent of soil and vegetation, the soft clatter of tools and baskets, the subtle breeze brushing her skin, each sensation reinforcing her focus and measured care. William allowed a subtle, approving shift in stance, a silent acknowledgment of her effort and precision, maintaining the equilibrium between observation and unobtrusive presence, reinforcing the unspoken communication and emerging understanding between them. As the sun continued its descent, the camp was bathed in deep, golden light, the shadows lengthening and softening the textures of earth, wood, and foliage, while Anna moved with steady, deliberate rhythm, each gesture a quiet affirmation of competence, attention, and the unspoken bond of careful observation and mutual awareness beneath the expansive Texas sky. The sky had deepened to shades of rose and violet as the final light of day spread across the wide Texas plains, stretching shadows long over the red clay paths, the wooden barracks, and the neatly arranged garden plots of Camp Hearn. Anna Muller carried the last of the harvested vegetables to the central stand, her hands steady, movements deliberate, each step balanced and precise on the uneven ground. The other women moved in similar measured motion, the quiet rhythm of their synchronized labor blending with the distant sound of cattle shifting in the corral and the faint call of birds returning to roost. William Carter walked along the perimeter of the garden, his shadow long across the clay, eyes following the careful gestures, subtle shifts of balance, and measured motions of Anna and the other women, observing without intrusion, providing a steady presence that reinforced confidence without words. Anna paused briefly, setting the basket down with careful attention, adjusting its contents to maintain balance, her fingers brushing the woven handles lightly, a small, deliberate act that reflected both diligence and growing assurance in her work. William's gaze met hers for a moment, silent, steady, conveying approval and acknowledgment without a single word, a quiet affirmation that resonated more deeply than any spoken encouragement. The warm evening breeze lifted strands of hair from her neck, carrying the scent of dry earth, sun-warmed clay, faint cedar, and the subtle fragrance of leaves and vegetables, intertwining with the residual warmth of the descending sun to form a rich sensory landscape that grounded her focus. She bent slightly to adjust a row of plants, hands brushing against soil, leaves, and stems, noting subtle variations in texture, color, and alignment, each small adjustment executed with care and precision. William observed, letting the scene unfold naturally, noting every microgesture, the coordination of body, the subtle balance, and the quiet concentration, forming an unspoken dialogue of attentiveness and trust that had built over the course of the day. Around them, the camp maintained a quiet rhythm. The soft scrape of tools, the gentle thud of baskets, the muted murmur of German voices exchanging brief remarks, the distant sound of hooves, and the occasional rustle of wind through sparse trees. Anna inhaled slowly, the warmth of the sun fading gently on her arms and face, feeling the steady pull of fatigue in her muscles yet buoyed by the careful rhythm, the measured cadence of steps, motions, and tasks that had become familiar throughout the long day. William allowed a subtle shift in stance, a quiet acknowledgment of diligence and skill, maintaining a balance between unobtrusive presence and attentive observation, reinforcing the silent trust and understanding that had grown between them. The sunlight softened further, painting the camp in golden, rose-tinted hues, the shadows lengthening and blending across red clay, wooden structures, and greenery, highlighting textures and subtle motions in a rich, enveloping light. Anna straightened, hands resting briefly on the handles of the basket, shoulders easing slightly, breath steady, eyes lifting to the distant horizon where plains met sky, absorbing the vastness, the stillness, and the sense of quiet accomplishment. The other women completed their tasks in a measured, synchronized flow, each movement precise, deliberate, forming a subtle harmony of effort and attention that filled the space with quiet purpose. William observed the pattern, noting microadjustments, subtle gestures, the interplay of balance, rhythm, and concentration, the unspoken communication between laborer and observer, shaping a growing connection of trust, attentiveness, and shared awareness. A gentle breeze stirred again, lifting loose strands of hair and carrying the scent of earth, vegetation, and warm clay, mingling with the soft sounds of the camp settling into evening. Anna paused to breathe, grounding herself in the sensory details, letting the warmth, the wind, the subtle sounds, and the quiet presence of William reinforce her focus and poise. Each movement, each gesture, each careful adjustment carried meaning, the shared, unspoken understanding between them forming a delicate, invisible thread that had developed over the hours, the rhythm of work, observation, and silent acknowledgment blending seamlessly beneath the expansive, fading Texas sky, the day ending with a golden glow, shadows stretched long, and the subtle sense of connection, competence, and quiet trust established in the warm, fading light.